Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everyone who have attended the session. Please, can I get a thumbs up if colleagues can hear me clearly? Am I audible enough to everyone? Thank you for that confirmation. Colleagues, my name is Kosie Tuntuli. I'm from the Research Capacity Development Unit. I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's session. The workshop for today is titled Building a Feedback Framework, Best Practices for Supervisors and PDRFs in Structuring a Conversation. Before we can move on, colleagues, I would like to let you aware that this workshop is recorded. This is for the purpose of keeping all the records of our workshop, as well as to share with everyone the resources of each and every workshop that we have at the Research Capacity Development Unit. So the recording of this workshop will be uploaded to your respective model communities, which includes the supervisor community as well as the PDRF model community. And we will also be uploading to the RCD management system, which is the system that has been integrated to the UJU link, which is available under services. And then the last option is RCDMS. That is where you can find your profile. If you haven't completed your profile, colleagues, we urge you to do so. It takes about less than 5 minutes. Some of your details are already there. You just need to populate the remaining fields, and you will be good to access all our resources, which include the recording of each workshop, as well as be able to see and access all our upcoming workshop and book in time. In that platform, you will also be able to generate your own certificate of attendance. After you have attended the workshop, you can just download your certificate. Now, before I introduce our facilitator, allow me, colleagues, to go through some few housekeeping rules. As I've mentioned, the recording of this workshop will be shared, as well as the presentation. Right now, all your mics are muted. However, I will enable them just after the workshop has started. Colleagues, please ensure that there is no background noise from your side. Always keep your mic muted when we are not speaking, just to avoid any disruptive from your side. However, if you do have a question, just unmute your mic, or alternatively just type under the chat and I will notify the facilitator that someone has a question or any contribution that you have. Feel free to use the chat to ask question or raise your hand to engage in discussion, and I will notify the facilitator. I will be sharing the feedback evaluation toward the end of the session. We kindly request you, colleagues, to take up your 3 minutes and fill that feedback. It helps us in terms of improving our service delivery, as well as to see areas that we can improve, and also to give feedback to our facilitators for taking their time to facilitate this workshop that we are providing. Um, with that being said, now I introduce our facilitator for today's workshop, Dr. Lorenzo David. Dr. Lorenzo David is currently a coordinator at the Research Capacity Development Unit at the Postgraduate School, University of Johannesburg. Dr. David was recently awarded a PhD in biochemistry for his assessment of transferring tech gold, palladium, and gold palladium bimetallic and nanoparticles and their potential for anti-cancer drug delivery at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. By adapting a holistic approach to education, Dr. David hopes to inspire students to achieve personal and academic success with a hands-on and learner-centric approach, value-based learning. Once again, thank you so much, colleagues, for taking up your time in joining us for today's workshop, and I would like to thank our facilitator, Dr. Lorenzo David, for taking your time as well. We look forward to a productive and insightful session. Colleagues, we do encourage engagement. So if you have any contribution, as I've mentioned earlier, just type under the chat, or alternatively, just raise your hand and I will notify the facilitator that someone has a question or any contribution that you would like to make. I now hand over to Dr. Lorenzo David. You can start the session. Thank you so much, colleagues, once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nkosi, and welcome everyone. I hope you all are well. I'd like to thank you guys for making the time to join us today for this session. I think it's something that's very important. We have done a few similar sessions regarding feedback, but we hope that this is going to build on some of the previous presentations, as well as provide a bit of further insight in terms of, how do we best structure these conversations? Because as we go through the presentation, we will find out and we'll discuss a bit more the importance of effective feedback. And I'd like us to look at it from the perspective of being a supervisor, but at the same time, the perspective of when we received feedback as a student. So I hope that this presentation will be something that generates a bit of discussion. So with that, I'm just going to share my screen, and if Mr. Nkosi, if you can please just let me know once I'm sharing the screen, if it is appearing, as well as if it's appearing on presenter mode.
Yes, Doc, we can see your screen and colleagues can confirm in their side if they can see the screen. If not, colleagues, just refresh your browser or you can just log in, log out and log in again, and then you'll be able to see the screen that is currently being displayed. Thank you, Dr. David. You can proceed.
Thank you, Nkosi. Okay, so like we discussed and that we just spoke about a few minutes ago, the title of today's session is Building a Feedback Framework. And, what are the best practices for supervisors as well as PDRFs in structuring these conversations with students? So just to go through some of the session objectives, by the end of the session, we hope to provide a bit of understanding on the role and impact of structured feedback in supervision. And I think the key point here is being that our feedback should be structured to the student. And we're going to discuss as well in terms of what is the ultimate goal of feedback? How do we see it? And what adaptations can we make to ensure that the student is getting maximum benefit from this relationship that we have with them. We also would like to apply a clear framework to guide these feedback conversations, use evidence-based strategies to give constructive as well as supportive feedback, because I feel that those two go hand in hand. And this does not mean that we only speak about the good and we kind of place our students in a cocoon, but rather just having a balanced approach to it. We'd like to also go through how do we foster this two-way communication as well as generate some reflective dialogue with the students. And lastly, we'll identify some tools and techniques which will help us to enhance our supervisory relationships. So if we have attended a few of these sessions, we'll always go through a bit of a definition. So we'll start off with this. Why exactly does feedback matter? And I know that many of us will have, lots of answers in our mind, but I've kind of broke them down into 4 points. The first one is that it's going to shape our research quality and direction for the student. Now, like I said previously, we have to often look at the situation as well as what we're reviewing from the perspective of the student. Our feedback always needs to be clear and concise. It needs to give proper direction. It needs to instruct. It needs to show them how they can improve. And, sometimes the way we can look, especially when we placed with all of these deadlines, how do we provide feedback, that meets all of these criterias, but still stays within, our allocated time that we have actually pushed aside for it. So I think at the end of the, excuse me, I think at the end of the day, the more effort that we put in, especially at the beginning stages of providing this feedback to our students, these conversations that we have with them will actually end up saving us a lot of time as we approach the time closer to submission. Constructive feedback also allows the student to develop autonomy as well as confidence. And I think that is another key factor that we need to consider. These students have trusted us and they are they are requesting our supervision, it is upon us to actually build them up and allow them to build their confidence as young researchers as well. Effective feedback will also allow you to reduce dropout rates. Um, from past experiences as well as conversation with students, especially those who have decided to step out of the degree for a while, very often they feel overwhelmed. They feel that, what is expected of them may be a bit too much, or maybe the circumstances aren't right at the time. But I think that by us being able to provide them with clear direction, this is what you're doing right, this is what you're not doing right, and this is the steps that you can take to actually reach your goal, will actually assist us in actually reducing the dropout rates. And effective feedback also fosters stronger academic relationships with our students. And like we're saying, it's helping to build them up as well. Now, an important point is that the quality of our feedback significantly will predict postgraduate student progress as well as completion. So this is actually a key step that we have, because we understand that very often we will not be having, I think very rarely, in fact, will we be having these feedback meetings on a daily basis. So if we're having them once every 2 weeks, or maybe once every month, or once every 2 months, we need to ensure that this feedback that we're providing them will be able to sustain them until our next meeting, provide them with the correct direction, and point them and provide them with the correct resources that we can make the changes. So when we have this next meeting, what we have discussed has actually been achieved. And we'll notice as we go through this, and as we start, possibly adapting certain aspects of our feedback, we will see the direct impact in our students in terms of the quality of work that they're providing as well. So if we look on the other side of it, what are some of the consequences of poor feedback? Now, whenever I prepare for a presentation such as this here, I don't like to look at it only from the perspective of where we sit currently. What I like to do is also think about it from the perspective of how did it feel when I was a student? Because I think if we can form that relationship, and if we can think back to maybe our past experiences, we would want to be more willing to obviously avoid maybe certain behavior that we didn't like when we were actually students as well. So when feedback goes wrong, it's very easy for it to demotivate as well as disorientate students. Now, if we look at it from the perspective of a student, you're coming in as a master's or a PhD. Let's just say you don't have a vast amount of knowledge on a particular research area. And so you write something, you submit it to your supervisor. And when we read this, we like, this is completely off topic. It's not what we've discussed at all. And the feedback that we give can actually break down the confidence of the student, when what we should be doing is actually building them up. So building them up does not mean we don't get to correct, but what it means is we find a balance in our approach. Incorrect feedback, and poor feedback rather, can also delay or derail progress by affecting a student's motivation. They will be less likely to actually be working on it. It sounds counterintuitive, but that is the truth. Or if you think back to when you had a really, really difficult discussion with maybe one of your supervisors, sometimes the students say, I need to take a few days off. And we understand, especially in your master's and your PhD, taking a few days off is not something that everyone can afford to do, especially with the amount of work and the quality of work which is expected in today's degrees as well. Poor feedback is also a breeding ground for misunderstanding and resentment. And once these emotions take hold and start to, foul the relationship between a supervisor and a student, it's quite difficult for you to go back to the start. So if we set the precedent at the beginning in terms of, having these conversations, providing this is how I provide my feedback, etc., we can nip these in the bud, essentially. And the last point is, when we are submitting, if we're providing poor feedback, it basically reinforces a power imbalance. It tells the student that you will just listen to everything that I say. I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. And, you just have to follow my instructions, but you may not have complete understanding as to why. And in my own personal opinion, and this is just my opinion, I don't feel that this is correct for me. So I always feel that when I'm working with a student, it's not just to tell them what they're doing wrong, or I am in this position and therefore you should listen to everything I'm saying. But I think it's more of a dialogue, because we'll notice that the transition that happens from a student when they first start their degree to when they're completing, especially a PhD student, very often the student will have, a lot of information. They would have read a lot of paper on that specific area. So I think taking their opinion into consideration, evaluating it, listening actively will actually allow us to provide better feedback as well. So the next slide is titled as feedback as a dialogue and not a monologue. Before I go on with the slide, I'd just like to say, please, if at any point anyone would like to jump in, if you have anything to add, please feel free. I like these sessions to be as engaging as possible. I know it's not always possible. Not everyone feels comfortable, but even if you want to pop a message in the chat, please feel free. And Mr. Nkosi is actually monitoring the chat, so he can bring that to my attention, and I'd be more than happy to discuss any point with you as well. So when we're talking about this feedback as a dialogue, not a monologue, this essentially deals with what is the paradigm, what is the relationship, how do we see this between ourselves and the student? If, and I'm just going to use a general, maybe a general definition here. If we look at it maybe from years ago, we'll see that it was essentially one way in a general sense. What your supervisor told you, you would do. And even sometimes if you didn't have a clear understanding as to why you expected to do it, you would go ahead and make those changes. Now, while that is good, and it does have its benefits, we're not going to say that everything is wrong with it. I think that the way that academia is actually evolving, the way the society is evolving today, that people need to have a dialogue. There needs to be an understanding as to why exactly am I making these changes? Because often, as supervisors, we see a larger picture. We understand, maybe through reviewing other theses or reviewing papers, what would be accepted, what is at the correct standard. And sometimes having these conversations with students and just telling them, what, you don't have enough work, you need to add this, you need to do, a couple of months more of lab work, you need to add a certain number of experiments, without them understanding the background or your rationale for it, can actually bring about some negative feelings as well, which is not good. No one wants to work in an environment that is not conducive, that's not good for them, or not good for their mental health as well. So we need to shift the paradigm, the feedback paradigm, from just being one way where a student submits a piece of work and we just give 100 comments and we send it back to them, and that is the extent of our conversation, to now moving towards a reflective dialogue. And by doing this, we are able to build feedback literacy, essentially by creating this dialogue here between us and the students. We're able to help them to understand why exactly are we requesting these changes? What is the reason for it? What is the outcome? What are we aiming for? And I feel that even though, many of us would say that it is a bit more work, at the end of the day, we have been tasked with guiding these students. So I think that is something important for us to consider as well. When we shift the paradigm, it actually involves joint responsibility for learning. And I am a strong believer that no matter if I look at myself today or if I hopefully look at myself in the next 10 years, I still want to believe that I will always be learning, and in that case, then we can always learn from our students as well. So how do we go about having these conversations? So I think always when we approaching this, especially us as many of us as emerging academics, having a structured feedback conversation model will help greatly. And the reason of this is that structure keeps the conversations productive as well as aligned with progress milestones. We don't want to go off on tangents and confuse the student. We want to obviously be step by step. So how do we go about this? So we've broken it down, and this is from some research that we've done, into a 4-part feedback framework. The first one is to prepare what is the goal. What is the goal of me reviewing this particular chapter? What is the goal of my actual feedback? Do I just want to highlight to them where they're going wrong? Do I want to tell them what they're doing right? Do I want to advise them on the way forward, etc.? The next step is that obviously we're going to engage, meaning we'll create a dialogue with the student. And I think us having this sort of relationship where we can openly discuss ideas with our students is actually something very important. We would all understand that many of the times when there is some friction that occurs between a student and a supervisor, it's often due to a misunderstanding. So I think it's important for us to clarify, our expectations, clarify our comments, as well as allow the student to clarify themselves as well. So by doing this, we ensuring mutual understanding from all parties. And the last step is going to be when we close. So we agree on actions as well as the next steps. And I should have added here in terms of timelines as well, because we don't want the student to take 6 months to complete, let's just say, an abstract. Obviously, that's going to shift everything with regards to their submission as well. So I have a bit of a case scenario that I'd like us to work on. And I think in the meantime, Mr. Nkosi can just uh, get prepared with splitting us up into some breakaway rooms. It's only going to be for 5 minutes, but I'd like to generate some discussion between members of the audience. So this is the case study that we thought would be a bit helpful. So think of this case scenario. A student submits a very weak literature review draft. Now, this includes a poorly researched work, limited references, as well as limited insights. The student has essentially just paraphrased articles that they've read online. It is clear to you that not a lot of work has actually gone into putting this presentation together. So what I'd like you to discuss for the next 5 minutes in your groups is how would you structure this feedback session using the four-step model? And I have the four-step model up on the screen as well. So essentially prepare what is the goal of this conversation going to be? You know, how would you engage with the student? How are you going to approach? Because it's a sensitive topic when we're telling someone, I can see that you have not put in adequate amount of work here because it is not reflecting in the piece of writing. Um, how do you clarify mutual understanding and agree on the next step? So I'm not expecting paragraphs from anyone, just one or 2 points on each of these. How would you approach this using this particular model? So I think with that, I'm just going to come off presenter mode. Mr. Nkosi, if we are able to please split the participants into, I think it would be good, maybe we say groups of 5, just to keep the conversation going. So groups of 5, I think if we can do, or let's say 4. Groups of 4, if we can split them into, and then once everyone goes into the rooms, we will pull everyone back in the next 5 minutes, if that's good with everyone. But in the meantime, while Mr. Nkosi is busy with that, is there anyone with any questions or anything they'd like to add at this stage of the workshop? Please feel free to speak up or type a message in the chat box as well. Because are you there? Is you just working on breaking us into breakaway rooms?
Uh, Doc, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Kosi.
Yes, I'm busy assigning
Okay,
our colleagues to their respective groups.
okay, perfect. So thank you very much. So while Mr. Nkosi is actually busy with that, let's see if we can move on to the next.
So it's group 2.
So I'll just leave this up on the screen while we're waiting to be split into our breakaway rooms. please just take a few minutes or a minute or two to read through this case scenario and maybe jot down some ideas that you have. Remember, at the end of this, just as I'm saying with our students, we can always learn from our students. I believe that I can always learn from, the audience as well. So please feel free to jot down some ideas, chat some, type into the chat box, or have that discussion. And when we come back, maybe one member of the group can just type a few points into the chat. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Dr. David, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go see.
Just checking. So I've now opened all the groups.
Okay. Thank you very
Yes.
much. I see some people are entering the groups.
I'll
Okay,
just
so
check whoever who is not yet assigned. I will just send them. Okay.
okay, perfect. So I'm just going to this slide. I'm just going to post the content in the chat. Then at least when you are in your groups, you also have, I'm not sure if you're able to see the shared screen, but you will have access to the scenario as well. I think there's just 4 people who are not assigned in Ngozi. Dr. Schmidt.
Okay, let me just assign them.
Thank you.
It's like assign and then share.
Okay, so I see there's a few new participants who have just joined us. So all we're doing is for the next few minutes, as you can see on the shared screen, we just are breaking up into small discussion groups. There's a small case scenario that we have here in terms of how would we structure our feedback and the conversation with the student.
Yeah, just but it's almost fine now.
Kosi, I think your mic is unmuted. So please feel free to jot down any ideas. We're literally going to be another 3 minutes and then we'll jump back into the presentation. So we're just going to be another three, we leave, members of the audience for another 3 minutes in their groups. I think there's a few more people that have joined recently. So what you can do in the meantime is just look at the case study that we're discussing in terms of how we structure the feedback session using the four-step model, and that is provided in the orange text as well. So even if you don't want to share, it's fine. You can just make them some notes to yourself. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, we'll just give it another 3 minutes and we'll pull everyone back into the main room, and then we will continue with the session as well. Thank you all very much. Okay, Nkosi, I think we can start pulling everyone back into the main room, and then we can hopefully discuss what the groups have spoken about quickly, and then we'll move on to the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
To the discussion. Oh, we are back.
Yes, we're back. I'm glad there were some groups that were sorry to pull you guys back a bit early. We'll just wait for everyone to join, and then we'll spend a few minutes just going through what some of the groups have discussed. Okay, Ngozi, everyone is, all the rooms are empty?
Yes, Doc, all the rooms are empty now.
Okay, okay. So thank you everyone for participating in this short breakaway session. If there's anyone who'd like to maybe just highlight some of the key points that you or your group have discussed, or how you approach the situation, please feel free to unmute, or alternatively, you can simply just type it into the chat box. But it would be nice, I think, to share some of the ideas in terms of, what did the group think regarding how we would address it with the student. Do we have any takers?
Okay, good morning. Maybe I should go
Good.
in. My name.
Thank you, Dr. Martin. Yes, please. Please feel free.
Okay, and in our room, we did discuss that ultimately the goal
Mhm,
is to help the student build the student up. So no matter how bad and weak that literature
mhm,
review is, which
mhm,
the student has already drafted,
mhm,
first we're gonna appreciate that work already put in. The
mhm.
effort of putting in that weak literature. First, we appreciate the student to say, "Oh,
Yeah.
you've tried, you have done
Mhm.
this, you have done that,"
Yeah.
and then we move into the weaknesses to say, "Okay, now that you've done this." You discover that this work is not strong enough, your literatures are outdated. What are the literatures that you read to support
Mhm.
this work? Then
Yeah.
comes in the dialogue. So the
Mhm,
student tells us, "Oh, I read this, I read that, I read this."
mhm,
You, as the supervisor, you may know other literatures. So you
mhm.
can say, "Okay, why not read this? Why not read that?" We also
Yeah.
discover that sometimes the students, we assume that they
Mhm,
know they have done research methodology in one of their
mhm.
courses, but then coming to practicality, they are not
Yeah.
there at all. So
Mhm,
it becomes a teaching for us and a learning curve for them to start
mhm.
relearning what we assume they have learned. So it's in that process that as a supervisor, we begin to guide the student to say, for a literature review, there is a guide. You don't just go reviewing everything.
Yeah.
You've got your research title, you've got your objectives, the objectives of your study, the aim of your study would guide you into
Mhm,
what literature to review. And then you
mhm.
tell them you don't review literatures more than 5, 10 years. It makes your work
Yeah.
not look original, looks
Mhm,
obsolete. It becomes a teaching curve for the learner.
mhm.
It is also when we engage them in dialogue, you get to know if they are actually the ones doing the work or if
Mhm.
someone is paid to assist them do the work. So, but if you get those of them who are actually putting effort to do the work, it
Yeah.
becomes a learning for them. We don't say things that would demoralize them.
Yeah.
I have been in that shoe before. Maybe
Mm.
that's why uh, uh, um, I get to know more about this. You don't say,
Yeah.
no matter how bad, no matter when that student in the long run would have come to understand that my work was actually poor, but
Mhm.
yet in being poor, this was how my supervisor handled me. You would have produced a better supervisor in the future.
Mm.
And then you agree. You agree to say, "Okay, you're going to read this between this time and this time, read these articles, give me
Yeah.
feedback from these articles, integrate it into this your work, and then come back." That's a mutual understanding. You agree. That's a way to strengthen that core literature. And then think of the time. There must be a time frame, so that
Yeah.
it does not be forever. And by so
Mhm.
doing, you keep going and the student learn and the
Yeah.
literature review is strengthened. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martin, for that response, and to the group as well too for that discussion. I think you brought up some very important points in what you've said, and I like the fact that the way that we are approaching this is as a teaching opportunity, not just evaluating it on, what we see ahead of us, but how can we assist students to get them to the level that we need while, being balanced, being fair, and providing constructive criticism as well. And I think that's good. And then I like the point that you bring that you are drawing insights from your own experience, and I think that's something that's quite important for us, especially those of us who are breaking into the space of, supervising more often. I think it's good for us to lean on our past experiences and pull in those experiences into, how we move forward. So thank you very much for that. Are there any other groups that would like to discuss any additional points that they were speaking about? Before we move on, I'll just put my presentation back on presenter mode once again. Okay, if there's anything that any other group would like to add, please feel free to jump in. or you can type it in the chat box as well. Mr. Nkosi is monitoring that, and then we can always come back to it at the end of the presentation. I'm going to try not to be too long with this presentation. So let's see how we go through it. So the next two
Morning.
slides. Sorry, good morning.
Yes, I just wanted to appreciate the previous speaker about the goal that we are trying to set. So I wanted to add that sometimes in the beginning, students are not able to express themselves in writing.
Yeah.
So what you can do, I'm talking from experience. I remember my
Yeah.
supervisor will just set up a meeting or an MST meeting and say,
Yeah.
tell us, what are you trying to say? What you want to come up
Yeah.
with? And then in my presentation, that's where she was able to get what I was trying to say and the direction of my research. And then she started giving her input because it was not fully expressed in writing what I was trying to, to do. So I'm just adding to that, that creating a dialogue is very important because you are able now to get what is in the mind of the student and what the student is trying to achieve. And through that conversation and maybe presentation, you are able to gather more info and you are able to guide a student on the type of literature that a student can, look into so that the content is relevant. And yeah, thanks.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you very much for that. You both have raised very important points, and I'm sure there were similar discussions happening in the other groups as well. Um, I do like the point, and if I can, if I can just add something, I do like the approach in terms of, the way the supervisors or some from what you said your supervisors interacting with you, it just shows that the supervisor is understanding that um, I'm trying to find out more information in terms of how you're trying to put these ideas forward, and they're willing to build up, and that is really great to hear. And there are some fantastic supervisors. I know as much as each of us may have one or two stories in terms of supervisors that we may not have had the best relationships with. I'm sure there are equally an equal number of good interactions that we've had, because there are a lot of fantastic supervisors out there. So as always, I always feel that we learn from everyone around us, and that we can always take the best out of every interaction that we have with with people. So there is a message in the chat from Dr. Michael. So feedback session using the 4-step model. So we'll just quickly go through the points. So number one, the first point with regards to preparing, they say, just to add in this case, I believe my goal is to help the student understand the gaps in the literature review, improve their ability to engage with sources, and also guide them on how to structure a strong scholarly review that will align with the thesis objectives. I think that's good. Like, what is the goal? I think they've summarized it quite nicely there. On the next point, in terms of engaging, creating a dialogue. So Dr. Michael said, I will begin by asking the student how he or she approached the literature review. And I think that is something that was mentioned by Dr. Martin as well. And what challenges the student faced. For example, I will say, please can you walk me through how you selected and reviewed the literature for this draft? And that is a good point. Think back to when we first wrote our first thesis, be it in honors or in masters, and then people tell you, oh, you have to go online to this online library, Google Scholar, and when you go there, there's like thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of papers. How do you select the correct one? So while the intention and the effort may be there from the students, sometimes it can be misdirected. And I think our ability to identify that and push them onto the right path is actually key. So I really like that point. Dr. Michael goes on to say, I believe this will encourage openness and reflection rather than defensiveness. And that's, I think, is a good point. So in terms of the third point, Dr. Martin said, I will also point out specific concerns using examples. As an example, I can point out the overuse of paraphrasing. the lack of scholarly engagement, and also the minimal references. I will also try to clarify the understanding of the student, the difference between summarizing and critical synthesis. And this is something, I know I'm saying this quite a lot, but I think there's a lot of good points here. This is something which is very important. When we work with students and, let's just say we're reviewing their chapter 2, and I think the general consensus from everyone that I've worked with, all the students I've assisted, is that chapter 2 is the most challenging chapter. And what we see very often is because there's so much they want to write, there's so much of papers that they're finding, they forget to add some of their own insight into that chapter or even into other chapters. And I think that is actually a core skill that we need to develop in ourselves as well as in the students as well. So Dr. Michael goes on to say, for instance, I will say, I notice that many sections are paraphrased without analysis. A good literature review shows how studies connect, contrast, and where your study fits in. Let's improve on this. So I like the way it's broken up here because it essentially says, this is what I observe. That's the first part thing. I noticed that many sections are paraphrased. So this is what I'm observing. The next part, you providing them background in terms of what should a good literature review entail. And the next point, you're telling them, let's improve on this, meaning let's work on this together. Let me help you to reach the level that you need to be for a master's or a PhD or an honors. So I think that approach is quite good. And the last point would be, when we're closing, agree on actions and next steps. So Dr. Michael goes and say, I will summarize the key areas for improvement and agree on concrete steps with the student. As an example, I will say, please identify and review at least 10 reviewed articles. So you're setting a goal for them, and these 10 can be, over the next couple of weeks. Maybe you'll want to see 2 a week, or you can always discuss this with them as well. But providing a student with a timeline as well as a goal that they need to achieve is actually very important, because very often when we leave it up to the students, they will say, I'll do it tomorrow, and then 2-3 weeks, a month, 2 months have gone and nothing has been done. Dr. Michael goes on to say, please focus on comparing themes and identifying the gaps. So he's providing them with a bit more guidance in terms of what he's looking for. And lastly, please draft a revised literature review in 2 weeks. So giving them a timeline. In addition, I will provide support options such as sharing examples or scheduling a follow-up session. I hope these could be helpful. Thank you. So thank you very much, Dr. Michael, for typing that out. I think, Dr. Martin, you have your hand raised.
Yes, please. Thank you very much. I just would like to add that sometimes supervisors overload the supervisors with a lot of work to do at the same time. From my experience, I have come to appreciate that when supervising the student, we take them gradually, although depending on their intellectual capabilities. But you discover that, for instance, with chapter 1, you could just ask the student, you come up with your introduction. Your introduction should not exceed 4 paragraphs.
Yes.
It's very short. They go, they do that, you summarize it with them. Then it's okay. Can you now go into your background? Your background shouldn't exceed this. I used to write long paragraphs, very lengthy ones.
Yes.
But I discovered when I was under my supervisor that he said, no, these paragraphs are lengthy, it's boring, it's this. Then I learned to make my paragraph not more than 13, 14 lines. So we can actually ask the student to take it gradually. And before you know it, you've come up with a full-blown chapter. But when you ask the student, go and write your chapter 1, the student is like, oh, chapter 1. But that guide, gradually, introduction, background, conceptual, what? A bit would make up chapter 1. And even the student wouldn't know. So that would work when we do that, than asking them, go and bring your chapter 2. Go write your chapter 2 and submit without guiding them bit by bit. That's more effective. Even those who are very, very intellectually sound, that
Yes.
would even fast track their
Yeah.
work than asking them, do chapter 1 and 3.
Hmm.
And then you, the supervisor, will now take time to start reading the chapter 1, and you may miss out so many things.
Hmm.
But if you read that little patch of segments of the chapter, you discover that you put in all at a time, and the student learn along the way. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that, Dr. Martin. I think that you raised some important points there. So thank you very much. If there's anyone else that would like to jump in, please feel free. I'm just going to share so we can get through some of these. The next few slides we'll go through quite quickly because they're just essentially dealing in terms of what do we normally look for? How do we break down our feedback into manageable aspects and essentially segment it so the students understand what they need to work on. When we go back, I look at some of the students that I've worked with. If I'm putting, as you go through and you review, you're not realizing how many comments you actually, because every, if you go line by line or paragraph by paragraph, you may have certain comments. So what I generally like to do is, let's just say we break it down. And just as a disclaimer, these next two slides have actually been adapted from a presentation by Dr. Callie Guerin from La Trobe University. She recently did a session for us, and I thought it would be quite interesting for us to pull these two slides into this presentation as well. So I just want to give credit to Dr. Guerin for her work as well. So we look at it when we break down feedback into manageable aspects, we can identify certain key groupings, shall we say. The first one can be at the sentence level, it's grammar, paraphrasing, word choice, punctuation, these kinds of things. These are like minor, when I say minor, these are easy fixes because you're fixing your grammar, etc. It does not take very long. Formatting, we can group another comment under formatting, content ideas, structure, sequencing, argumentation, and voice or discourse. And what I'd like us, or what I would suggest is that when we are providing these comments to the students, let's just say we're going through a particular paragraph and we are providing comments. If a comment is global, meaning that if you would like them to make the same change throughout the rest of the documents, maybe indicate it there. So instead of us repeating the comment 10, 20 times, we say global comment, add references at the end, global comment, let's just say, ensure your sentences do not go over a certain length, ensure that your paragraph is a certain length, because what it does, it allows students then when they see a global comment, they can literally make those changes throughout the rest of the document. It saves you time, it saves them time, it gives them better direction, and it allows them to approach their changes. So instead of them having 150 comments, they may only have, between 50 to 100, depending on the length of the chapter as well. So when we are approaching this feedback, I think it's important for us to break it down. At the sentence level, what are we talking about? In terms of formatting, we can make a global comment. In terms of their content or ideas, we can have a global comment. Maybe this literature review could benefit from further work here, as people have suggested. Here are some potential titles or papers that you can review to include in your literature review. In terms of structure and sequencing, if you want to panel beat a particular paragraph or a particular page, by doing this, what we're doing is we're showing the students, we're giving them a blueprint on how to make changes throughout the rest of the document. And I think that's important because if students can see something, especially when they're working, be it late at night, they're not going to message you at 1 in the morning. But if they can see, they can work out for themselves, and it also generates that thinking, that critical thinking in them, and they will be better in their next versions as well. The next slide, as we said, is also from a presentation by Dr. Guril. And this just discusses some common errors, identifying patterns in your student submission. So we'll notice as we go through a particular chapter, maybe a student does not use formal language. They don't use academic tone. Maybe they like to use a more conversational tone in their writing. So instead of us going through, each of the comments, we make a global comment, highlight a few examples. Don't use such as, don't use among, these type of things, whatever aligns with your faculty or your department or your area of research, make these global comments. And by doing that, we also need to take into account that English is not the first language of all of our students. So, sometimes you'll have a student who is fantastic in their research, they're fantastic, and I'll say it from the point of a lab. But when it comes to translating their ideas and their data into a written document, there is a disconnect that happens there. So the onus is upon us essentially to build them up in that area as well. So when we are providing our feedback, take into account that English is not the first language of all of our students, and we are all there to help one another and build each other up, because at the end of the day, that's how the university will continue to be successful as well. So
Sorry, Dr. David, to interrupt.
No problem.
Yes, Dr. Martin said he doesn't understand what you mean by global comment.
Oh, okay. So this is what, let me just take it back. So in my previous job, what we used to do is we would complete a piece of work and we'd send it to, let's just say, our line manager, and they would actually review, be it a presentation, be it an article, whatever it may be. And I noticed that they'll always use a global comment. So a global comment essentially means what I'm identifying in this particular comment. I want you to go through the rest of the text and make the similar changes. As an example, if I put a global comment, use more recent references. Now that comment is not just associated with one particular paragraph, it means that the comment is associated with the entire document. So instead of me going and identifying 15, 20, or 30 outdated references, the onus now goes on the student to be like, okay, there's a global comment here for me to identify any references which may be outdated. So what I will do is I will go through the entire document and make sure my references are as up to date as possible. So Dr. Martin, I hope that clears up in terms of global comment. I'm sorry, for me, it's a term that we are a bit more familiar with. I should have actually provided a bit of background to that as well. But I hope that answers your question, Dr. Martin.
Yes, Doc.
Yes, please. Thank you very much. Yes,
okay.
please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Doc. Okay. So we'll go through the slide quite quickly. So like we said, take into account that English is not the first language of all of our students. So in terms of these changes, such as the articles, the use of a, and, or the, vocabulary, the wrong form, tense, subject, verb, agreement, word order, formality, is it too informal, is it too formal, etc., is it using too complex words? These are examples of global comments that you can use. Because if we look at it, if you're going to go and change every article or every form of the word from discuss to discussion, you're going to end up with a lot of comments. It's going to overwhelm you. It's going to take a lot of time. It's also going to overwhelm the students. So when we are identifying patterns in the student submission, what I would suggest is write these global comments and tell them that this comment is applicable to the entire document. And therefore, the student gets the feedback sooner, and they're able to make these changes, and it also causes them to engage more with their work as well. Okay, so we're going to go through, excuse me, some characteristics of effective feedback. So what exactly makes feedback helpful? And we've discussed many of this, so I'll go through it quite quickly. What makes feedback helpful? Firstly, it needs to be specific. As an example, feedback, I look at it as being directions. If I'm asking you directions to go down to Durban, and you tell me, okay, just go on this road, take this turn, and follow the signs. It's not very specific, and there's a good chance that I'm going to get lost. I don't know where I'll end up. So the same way with feedback, we need to be specific. We need to guide the student. And in the beginning, our guidance may need to be a bit more until they understand how exactly we provided this feedback. It also needs to be timely. Throughout universities, across the world, you interact with students, and you will find out that, sometimes students they will submit a chapter, they will only get feedback in 3 to 4 months. So wherever possible, we should try to be as timely as possible in our feedback, and this can be laid out in our supervisor agreement, feedback agreement that we will discuss shortly. The next point is that it needs to be balanced. It needs to highlight the strengths as well as the improvements, as well as the opposite side. You know, highlight their strength, highlight where they need to improve, highlight what they're doing good, highlight what you like. At the same time, how you guys can work together to improve the document. The tone I always feel should be respectful, and this is something that it's quite hard to do over text. So in this regard here, depending on your supervision style, but what I generally like to do or like to have done would have done previously is that I would submit the document to the student and then I'd arrange a meeting for directly after. So I'll pop them an email and say, please find, as an example, please find your revised chapter with comments. Please can we set up a meeting to discuss this in further detail? You can read through the comments in the meantime, and I will provide further background in our meeting. And the meeting can be 10, 15 minutes, because sometimes when a person is reading a comment on a screen, they can associate it with a particular tone, and that can bring up certain emotions. We don't want to unnecessarily stress students out. We don't want to put unnecessary stress on ourselves as well. So a simple 5-10 minute conversation actually does the world of good in that. There's also actionable, feedback. Effective feedback should have actionable suggestions. This is what I think you should do. Maybe review these papers, maybe take this approach, maybe change the model that you're using, etc. And key is that it should be delivered at the right stage of progress. At the beginning of, when the student is writing their proposal and you are just providing all this feedback on stages they haven't done as yet. Maybe they just outlined it and you are providing this intense feedback. Maybe it's not the right time. So I think effective feedback is delivered meeting all of these characteristics as well as at the right time or right stage of progress as well. So we're going to go through some feedback delivery tools, and these tools basically help us to guide reflection. So these tools promote transparency as well as foster ongoing.
Sorry, Doc.
Yes, Nkosi?
Yes, there is a hand up by Dr. Martin.
Okay. Thanks, Dr. Martin. You can go ahead.
Sorry, it looks like I'm on the spot today is because I'm enjoying this workshop.
No problem.
Just want to comment that maybe we as supervisors will be cautious on how we give our feedback and comments on the main work of the student. I've
Yeah.
had a situation where a professor lost his job because
Oh,
he was passionate and zealous
yeah.
in supervising a student, but his
Yeah.
comment was made on the body of the student's work. So
Oh,
that's why the use
yeah.
of track changes are very,
Yeah.
very useful for us, because once you make
Yeah.
heavy, my emphasis is on heavy, heavy comments on the student's body of work itself,
Yeah.
it assumed that the
Yeah.
supervisor was the one writing the work. But no matter
Yeah.
how heavy the comment is, if it is made on the track changes,
Yeah.
and the student considers that comment is relevant
Yeah.
to his or her work and decides to adapt that, then
Yeah.
now that's the student adapting suggestions into his or her work. But if that comment is made on the student's work, it may implicate the supervisors. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that, Martin. That's a interesting. It's an interesting example that you provided. And it just brings something to mind. I was having a conversation with our boss, Professor Govender, and Prof. Govender has supervised so many students, and one of the comments that she actually made was that when we are providing feedback to the student, we need to keep in mind that it is not our thesis. We can't change it to the point that it no longer becomes a student's work. And I think that is also something that maybe we need to consider, because when I first started reviewing and assisting some students, I'd want to correct everything that I thought, well, aligned with academic tone, academic writing, the particular area. But then when we think about it, at the end of it, does that still remain the student's work? So I think while we are tasked with guiding the students on the do's and don'ts, I think we also need to be conscious in terms of, at the end of the day, this is part of the learning process for the student. And we don't want to make this number of changes where the student, it no longer becomes their work. So just to add on to what you've said, Dr. Martin, but thank you very much for that input. So jumping back quickly to the feedback delivery tools, there's three that we've essentially highlighted here. I'm going to give you some examples in the next slide. The first one's going to be a feedback rubric, and this is essentially structured expectations. So a feedback rubric provides a framework for giving consistent, transparent, as well as constructive feedback. And this is based on predefined criteria. Okay, so it typically will include, let's just say, and we'll go through it, what is the criteria? This could be argument and coherence, use of literature, structure and flow, language and style. Then we got some descriptors. What is the quality? Is it good? Is it excellent? Does it need improvement? And then we go on to the rating scale, which we'll discuss it in a bit more detail as well. So this is an example of a feedback rubric, and these are obviously available online. They're quite easy, and you can always adapt it to your own particular needs. So if you're reviewing chapter 1, chapter 2, is it a research chapter? Is it a review paper, etc.? And you can adapt it. But essentially what we're doing here is that we're telling the student, these are the 4 areas that we're looking at. And of the 4 areas, sometimes their use of literature may actually be, if my pointer can actually appear on the screen, the use of literature can actually be extensive. It can be excellent, meaning they've researched extensively, they've read critically, they've critically analyzed in using recent papers. However, we see that their structure and their flow, the way they're putting it together, may just be good or need some improvement. So by putting this sort of rubric together, the student will see, this is what I've done well, this is good, this here needs to be worked on. So overall, on the balance of it, they can see, what, I have done some good things, I have done some bad things, but overall, this is how I move forward with actually progressing my chapter as well. The next point is going to be in terms of creating a feedback agreement. And this is just something that you can have either informally with the student or even type it in an email, or each of you can sign it. It completely depends on you. So I'll go through it quickly. When we're creating the feedback agreement, some of the key points that I think that will be important for us to consider will be, number one, the frequency of the feedback. Give them a timeline. If you submit a chapter to me by our agreed timeline, I will provide feedback to you within 2 weeks, 3 weeks of submission. What is the preferred format? Do you like written comments, track changes, audio notes, in-person discussions? And like we're saying, by having this document here, it also protects us later on. It protects the student as well, because if either of us don't actually meet up on our end of the bargain, then any consequences later on, we have documentation for it. Response expectations. So should the student respond in writing, revise and resubmit, request a follow-up? What is the tone and language? Agreement to maintain constructive, respectful communication, especially when delivering critique, because we look at it at the end of the day, we are all people. No one would like to feel as if they're being spoken down to or being spoken disrespectfully to. Regardless, at the end of the day, we all are equal, we all are people. The student role in feedback. Encouragement for self-reflection and questions. Now, the student should not just accept everything that we say. I always like to encourage my students, and I tell them, what, you are allowed to disagree, and we can have a discussion about it, because I want to understand your point of view. Maybe you are coming from a different perspective, something that I've not considered before. So encourage them for self-reflection and questions, critical analysis of their own work, not just passive receipt of their feedback. And the next one's going to be conflict management. How will miscommunications or disagreements be addressed? By laying this out here, you have a structure and approach on how to go forward with it. And the last point would be our review schedule. So agreement to revisit and adjust the feedback arrangement if needed. So once again, when it comes to giving constructive feedback, just a few points that we've highlighted here, and these have also been discussed in a few previous workshops. Some of the best practices for supervisors as well as our postdocs. The first thing, use I statements. So you can say something, I feel that this can be improved on, instead of saying, this work, you have written a poor piece of work. So use I statements, you put it on yourself. You say, I believe that we can improve on this chapter. And then we go on to the next point, which is give, feed, forward, future orientated. So basically, what are we saying? This is what you've done now, but when we're moving forward, these are the changes that you can make. So then you don't have to go through the entire process again of making the same changes. It's good, I feel, to start with a self-assessment for the student. So when we have this meeting with them, sit down, tell them, thank you, I've read your chapter. Maybe you want to just summarize to me, what do you feel? How do you feel it went? What are your thoughts and insights from it? Because very often a student knows when they have not submitted a good piece of work. And by them, if it is not a good piece of work, or maybe it is a good piece of work, but you need to build up their confidence because they would assume that it's not. So either way, it's good to get their perspective, and it will actually guide the discussions that we have thereafter. And the last point would be check for understanding. What is your interpretation? Ask these probing questions, because especially when students come in, sometimes, they feel that, they can't have these conversations with their supervisor. And obviously, this is something that is personal and in your approach as a supervisor. But I think asking these questions, instead of students saying, yes, I understand, yes, I understand, yes, I understand, but they don't, we can actually iron these out the beginning. So when they leave that meeting, it is productive, not only for you, but it's productive for them, which is one of our key goals as well. So it's important for us to always acknowledge effort, suggest growth pathways, and also ensure emotional safety in the feedback space. Some dialogue tools for feedback. So in order, we need to ensure that we're fostering two-way conversation. This is a point that has been come up. It's come up in a previous slide as well. Ask open-ended questions. How do you feel about this chapter? How do you feel that it went? How's the writing process going? There's nothing stopping us from asking these questions. Student self-evaluation prompts. Basically ask them how they felt about a particular piece of work. Then we go on to a bit more technical stuff. So it says another tool for dialogue tools for feedback would be Socratic questioning techniques. This is something we came across quite recently. And essentially it means plan and structure, your questions. So have a list of questions that you can ask them, listen and reflect. And this involves active listening. We're listening to what they're saying, we're listening to the issues that they're having, and we're providing them with good feedback. Ask them probing questions, encourage perspective taking. We need to develop independent critical thinkers. We don't just want people to just agree with everything that we're saying. We want there to be some dialogue and discussion because that's healthy. And focus on open-ended questions. Something that's very important is for us to have active listening as well as paraphrasing. And this here, if a student is talking to me, I'll try to listen to them as best as I can. And then I'll say, okay, so from what I understand, this is what you're saying, just to make sure that we're both on the same path, we're on the same level as well. Okay, so how do we practice giving constructive feedback? So feedback models to structure response. What are some of the advantages of using these models? And I think I actually may have removed, this slide is actually missing. This was actually an activity, but it's okay. I think in the interest of time, we can actually move on. So this should actually say feedback models, okay? So what are some of the advantages of using a model in terms of giving feedback to a student? Very often if we just go off what we feel, while we are doing to the best intentions, sometimes it may not always be received well because people are different. What offends one person may not offend someone else. That's how it essentially works. By having a model, we are providing structure and clarity in terms of our responses. We are reducing emotional defensiveness. We are promoting consistent and reflective feedback, as well as we are encouraging student ownership of their learning. So the three common models that I would like to discuss is going to be firstly the feedback sandwich, which is something that I think many of us are aware of. Next one's going to be Pendleton's model as well as the Boost model. So these models essentially act like templates. They help us to deliver messages that are thoughtful, constructive, and easier for students to receive and act upon as well. So let's go to the first one. And I am approaching the end of my presentation. I'm sorry it's gone on for a bit longer, but I'm glad there was some discussion as well. We really do appreciate that. So the first one is the sandwich technique. Just like we make a sandwich at home, how does it work? We start off with a positive. So a positive opening, we highlight the strengths. I really like the fact that you reviewed this number of papers. I really like some of your insights that you provided. I really like that you've used recent. We can always find something positive about what a student has done. I really appreciate the effort because I can see that you put in a lot of effort. Then we go on to a bit more of the difficult conversation, the constructive critique. We identify specific areas that we want to improve. So we say, while I like what you've done here, I feel like these areas can actually benefit from further discussion, further research, further discussion of papers. And in the end, you have a supportive close. So basically, you encourage and reaffirm, potentially say, you know what, you've done some good things, you've done some stuff that we can work on, but I'm here to support you. We will work on this together and we will be able to, by the end of it, this will be a good chapter because you're working with the student. So as an example, we say your introduction clearly outlines the research aims. This is positive. Then we go into the constructive critique. To strengthen the argument, consider citing more recent sources in the literature review. And then how do we end it? You're on the right track. These adjustments will really elevate the work. These are some general comments that we can make, and it is true because if a student follows the guidance that we're giving them, their work is going to be, it's going to improve. Then we'll quickly go through the next two models, which is going to be Pendleton's model, which is dialogue centered. This is basically going to be a conversation. So how does it work? The learner is going to state what went well. Sit down with them. Okay, what do you feel went well with this chapter? Then the supervisor will also add what went well. Thereafter, the learner will suggest what can be improved. So this is causing them to critically think on what they've written, and the supervisor can add further suggestions. So therefore, it doesn't feel as if the supervisor is we are laying all this on our students. They're taking ownership on what they can be improved on, because every piece of work, no matter who submits it, they can always be improvements on it. We all understand that. The last model is going to be the boost model. And this is effective. It's an effective feedback principle. So the boost model basically means your feedback needs to be balanced. It needs to be observed. So no emotion, needs to be evidence-based, what you see in front of you. It needs to be owned by the receiver. And once again, we say it needs to be specific, it needs to be timely. So, we can chop and change between these models here. I do think that they're quite effective, personally, but hopefully, maybe you can take some stuff and you will adapt it to suit your particular supervision style as well. So this is actually the activity that I was talking about. I think in the interest of time, I'm just going to maybe provide a few examples. So what I was going to ask us to do is to reconstruct these vague comments. If we can choose one, please feel free to type in the chat box if you would like to. So there's three, let's just say, common vague comments that we can come across. The first one is, this section is confusing, fix it. The next one is a classic, rewrite. And the last one will just be improve clarity. Now, we can identify what is wrong with these chosen statements. I can, the top of my head, say that they're not specific. They provide no further detail. They don't exactly tell the student what is confusing, what needs to be written, what aspect of the clarity needs to be improved upon. So how would we go about suggesting an improved comment? Okay, so let's just look at the second example, which is rewrite. Instead of us just putting rewrite, you can say this particular paragraph, the sentences are too long, it lacks clear direction. Please can we ensure that in the next draft that we follow a particular structure, that the sentences are not longer than, let's say, 25 to 30 words, that we are using simpler language, that we are referencing more often. So we're providing direction for the student, because if they just see rewrite, we are writing the comment from our perspective and our knowledge base. The student does not have that knowledge base. They don't have the same experience. So therefore, we need to put in a bit more effort and obviously guide them through the process as well. So it's important for us always, when we are providing our feedback, and we'll come back to this point, clarity and suggestion. Right? As an example, let's just look at the first section. This section is confusing, fix it. we can say consider reorganizing the section to highlight the core argument more clearly. So therefore, we're telling them in terms of your structure, it does not logically flow. And the student can work with that as well. So what is the role of postdocs in feedback? And I think this is something I want to touch on quite quickly, especially in, I think back to, when I was in the lab and, I used to speak to the postdocs, or I'll be working with the postdocs. They are the, as a postdoc, you often are the bridge between the lab, in our case, as well as the supervisor, in terms of you are in that in-between phase. So as a postdoc, you are uniquely positioned to offer a lot of support to students. And I think students should leverage that peer support. I always will say when I'm speaking to students, you know what, speak to the postdocs. They've been through the process. They understand what is expected. So in terms of a postdoc, what can we do? We can model feedback engagement. By speaking to the students, what we can do is we can provide informal, low stakes feedback, meaning that if we see that something's not going well in the lab, we can speak to them. We can tell them, maybe try this. And very often this will create a relationship between you, and we'll notice this will filter down to the basically lead to less work for the supervisor as well, allowing them to help more. Postdocs can also help decode a supervisor's comments, which I've needed on more than one occasion, as well as build confidence through mentorship. So while we are assisting the students, it is also an opportunity for us to informally supervise them, assist them, and it helps us to see what works, what doesn't work, and allows us one day when we are full-fledged supervisors, hopefully, then we have built up our skill set. We're not just learning on the job while it happens later on. So essentially, a postdoc can play a bridging role and make academic feedback feel less intimidating. And that's, part of the role that we can assume as well. So I'm going to quickly touch on, and this would be essentially the last content slide. What are some of the challenges in feedback conversations? Because we've gone through the advantages, the disadvantages, we've gone across some models, but that does not mean that it's not going to be a difficult conversation, especially when you are, you're highlighting something to a person, you're telling them they're not meeting the requirement, it's not an easy conversation to have. So these difficult dynamics, what are some of the challenges? The first one's going to be emotional reactions. Not every student is going to take feedback constructively. So you may get some emotional reactions from them, which can be a bit disconcerting to all parties. The next one is going to be cultural expectations. Now, we obviously have quite a diverse student group here at UJ. So in terms of the cultural expectations, what may be culturally acceptable in one culture may not be for a student from another. So therefore, we need to be able to tailor our approach to each of our students, understanding where they come from. And I'm not saying change yourself as a supervisor, but just be more aware and we need to be as considerate as possible, because we understand academia is obviously, it's globalized. We will interact with different students at all points of our career. There's also the hierarchical discomfort in terms of having that conversation with your students. So I think laying things out in a supervisor agreement as well as these conversations actually will make, setting clear boundaries very important, but at the same time, not being a situation where you only can speak to me once every 3 months. Having clear boundaries, but also more or less an open discussion, open relationship with them in a professional setting. And the last point is going to be conflicting expectations. So a student sometimes may expect, there was a student I remember who they completed their master's in a year and they came in to do their PhD. And they're like, I'm going to give myself 1 year to complete that. They didn't even understand, they didn't take into consideration minimum time to completion or any of that. So they were trying to push, but obviously the work was not of the same quality or the required quality for a PhD. And there were some conflicting expectations between the supervisor as well as the student as well. So I think it's good to have these conversations early on, especially when you're taking in a new student. This is what I expect from you. This is how I will support you. So everyone agrees to what each of their roles will entail. So in terms of just reflection on this workshop, I'd just like you to maybe just jot down, and this you can do, after maybe when you got a few minutes at some point, Your feedback plan. So from everything we've discussed today, everything that we hopefully, there's been some benefit to it. What is one change that you'll make to your feedback process? What tool or approach will you implement first? And how can we evaluate its effectiveness? Just maybe some points for you to consider when you have a few minutes later in the day. So some key takeaways, and this is wrapping up. Feedback is essentially a shared process. Structure enables, by having the structure enables clarity as well as safety, and dialogue deepens the impact. Having discussions, bringing about critical thinking deepens the impact. The tools and reflections that we spoke about actually increase the effectiveness. By using these tools, by using these models, it structures our approach, allowing us to be more effective, and that's what we obviously are aiming for as well. So last point is I will actually have these, I will see if I can upload them as resources. I'll give them to Mr. Nkosi. Resources under the June workshop tab. And essentially, these are some papers. I think I've been sent a few more that I will just create a bit of a folder and upload it there. So some additional resources for us. Two good papers. The first one will be Finding Confidence in Writing, Doctoral Writing Groups. And this is something which has been discussed in the session with Dr. Gooden. So if you have some time, please go and watch that video. And the next one is by Dr. Strack and Dr. Kumar, evaluating the implementation of a research-informed tool for dialogic feedback in doctoral supervision. They've actually done a lot of work, published quite extensively on this topic. So even if you just visit, search for these authors, you'll find a lot of information for them. And just to add, Dr. Gurin is actually a researcher developer at La Trobe University. She essentially works with, researching how to equip supervisors to become better, to adapt new approaches, etc., and how to improve the supervision process. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention and for your contributions. If there's any further questions or contributions, please feel free to either type in the chat box or jump in. But with that, I'll stop sharing and I'll hand over back to Mr. Nkosi. Thank you, Nkosi.
And thank you so much, Dr. Lorenzo. That was a great presentation. I do hope and believe that colleagues have learned something to take away here and to share with other colleagues and their students, those who are supervising. So now it's time for questions and contribution, colleague. So if you do have any question, just unmute your mic. No need to raise your hand because now the presentation is over. So you can just unmute your mic and ask your question or make your contribution. Alternatively, you can type under the chat and I will go through some chat or few messages that are already on the chat. Thank you so much, colleagues, for your attendance and making this workshop a possible one. Thank you so much. If you do have anything, just unmute your mic. Okay, I see that no one has a question at the moment. In the meantime, just a quick reminder that I have posted or shared a feedback evaluation link under the chat. We kindly request you colleagues to take your 3 minutes and fill that feedback in. So it's not that long. So it helps us in terms of improving our service delivery as well as to give feedback to our facilitators. So if you do have your 3 minutes and then just fill that feedback in, we will appreciate that. I don't know if I will be closing anyone out with a question or any contribution before I can officially end the session. So I see some few comments. Thank you, Dr. Beauty, for that. And thank you, Dr. Smith. Thank you very much. Very useful. Thank you. Another announcement, colleagues. We started, okay, before I make that announcement, let me take Dr. Michael. You can go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. Look, I just want to bring to attention a question. There are some students that I will not say that they are a little bit hard to supervise, and they believe that the comments and suggestions you are giving to them to do is big work, and they are not really interested in working. They just want you to approve their topic, approve everything. Let them just go that way. And when you give them more suggestions and recommendation how to improve their works, and they say you are giving them much workload, and that is too much. Even when you simplify it and even agree to work with them, they believe just let me go. That kind of situation. How do we undo such as postdoc?
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I was muted. Thank you for that, Dr. Michael. I think it's a good point that you're raising, and I think I'll give you my opinion on this, right? As much as this presentation focused on, we have to be, aware of the different circumstances that students present with, and that we have to obviously provide constructive feedback. I think at the end of the day, the point remains the same. If you are studying towards a master's or a PhD specifically, when you sign up, you understand that it entails a lot of work. It entails a lot of sacrifice. And I personally, this is my personal opinion, I believe that if we are dealing with such students, maybe we need to have a bit of a difficult conversation with them to explain to them that these degrees should not be taken lightly. They do require a lot of work. And maybe there's some misunderstanding or miscommunication that they may have on their side. But I think what is important is that as much as it is our responsibility as a supervisor to guide and empower students, I think it is equally a responsibility of ours to ensure the value of a particular degree, or this is a particular degree. So I think that there are certain things that we can I'm just looking for the word. There's certain things that we are able to compromise on in terms of timelines, but I think when it comes to quality of work and what is required, because what is required for a PhD, it should never be taken lightly. The same for a master's. So I think having that open conversation with a student and explaining to them, maybe providing a bit of background and telling them, the reason I'm asking you to do these additional experiments is not just because I want you to have more work or I want it for a paper. It is a requirement of the degree. And I think sometimes when students feel that we are giving them more work because we feel like giving them more work, instead of the work actually being a prerequisite to them meeting the minimum requirements for the degree, I think that's where some confusion can come again. So I think maybe just addressing it in that format, and that would be my approach to it, to explain to them that these degrees do take a lot of work. You are expected to put in obviously a certain number of hours, and I'm asking you to do this is because from my experience and what I have experienced previously, I see that these experiments, as an example, are required for you to meet the minimum requirements of the degree and for you to graduate. So I hope that answers your question, Dr. Michael. If not, you can maybe just add a bit more and I'll try and answer to the best of my ability.
Yes, that
you.
answer. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Michael, and thank you, Dr. David, for answering that question. I don't know if anyone else has a question. Okay, let me just check here. Okay. So the comment or the announcement that I wanted to make, colleagues, is the issuing of a certificate, attendance certificate. So we are currently working on the certificates for the month of May. So all your certificates we already started sending out. So if you don't get a certificate for May by next week, and you know that you have attended a certain workshop, we kindly request you to send us an email with the title of the workshop that you attended, as well as your full details. This is because, colleagues, if on the attended register we don't see the columns that we need probably other colleagues, they use the direct link. So the name is not provided, and their contact, which is the email, is not provided on the register. And then we simply ignore that. But if you come back to us and say, I attended the session on this date, this is the title of the session, I'm so and so, by providing your full details, title, full names, and your staff number or your student number, we can then issue the certificate. We go back to the register and we see that maybe you joined using the direct link, probably using a different name, and then we can issue you a certificate of attendance. But be sure that all May certificates will be sent out soon. With regards to June certificates, by next week, because June is ending by Monday, so we will start sending all June certificates by next week. That was the announcement I wanted to make. If you don't receive any certificate for May by next week, kindly send us an email with the title of the workshop that you have attended, and then we will be happy to issue a certificate of attendance for you. Thank you, colleagues. Dr. David, I don't know if you have any last word from your side before I can officially close this session.
Just quickly, I'd just like to thank everyone for attending the session. I really enjoyed it. Well, I enjoyed the discussion and we really appreciate it. And we hope to see you at future presentations as well. Please fill out the feedback form, as Mr. Nkosi said, and provide some suggestions on improvement, as well as maybe some topics that you'd like to see being discussed in the future. And we'll try and put those trainings together for you. Other than that, have a great day. And thank you, Mr. Nkosi, as well, for moderating the session. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much to our facilitator once again, Dr. Lorenzo David. Thank you for taking your time and providing such a very productive and insightful presentation. We really thank you for that. And thank you to colleagues for your attendance and engagement. I must say this was a very productive and engaging session. Thank you for your attendance and cooperating as well. So we look forward to the next workshop. The announcement will be sent out. Colleagues, I must emphasize the importance of making sure that you register for the workshop, because that's where we get your full details and issue the correct certificate of attendance. So please do register for all the workshop before you attend, so that we get all the information that we need from our side. So thank you for that, colleagues. I'm now officially ending the session. You can have a great day further. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.